I'm back, baby!
What is going on, everyone? I'm Joe Persinger, and welcome to the ever-evolving, never-ending Ready, Said podcast. If society's a joke, then we're just here for the first set. All right, are you ready to watch me be vindicated today? Because I certainly am. I don't know if you guys remember, but in the past we've talked about breaking points here and how I've had my skepticism towards, what they're presenting versus the reality of what it probably really is. And I think that's ranged from, me believing that they're kind of masquerading as, he's LARPing as a Republican, she's a Democrat, and, they're upfront about it, and this isn't corporate news. It's, and that's what they're presenting it as, but as it's basically become clear to me that this is just corporate news being marketed as something else, because remember, they were on Rising, which is part of The Hill, which is corporate news, so their natural inclination is going to be corporate news, but it's a pretty good grift if you can market it as independent media, especially when you get, the Joe Rogan approval, stamp of approval, But however, your actions are going to speak louder than your words, and as I pointed out in the past, that they kind of come off as a bit of an elitist, and they nonstop talking about Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And let's go to here, you could see, we've talked about this in the past, in some of our bigger videos here, Kyle Kalinske calling Crystal Ball stupid. I just think that's hilarious, because as I've, watched his podcast here and more, and I listen to Crystal Kyle and friends, but I've noticed that he has this tone he takes with people when he gets annoyed with them, and it's that like, oh, Crystal, she's so stupid. Like, he does that. Like, I think I was watching something that he did about Trump, and he did that thing, and I'm like, oh, this is what he does when he's like being a condescending jerk to other people. I totally get it. I've been saying this about the show, and I've actually received a lot of pushback on Twitter, Instagram, plenty of emails that we get here, and it's just, I feel very vindicated now, because about a month ago, they had Breaking Points had RFK on the podcast, and it was a disaster. So we're gonna watch a clip from Jimmy Dore breaking this down. It's a little bit long, but this is let's just jump into the video.
For me personally, it's an issue, and it's a real sort of red line. And I know I'm not alone in that, especially running in a Democratic primary. There are going to be other millions of people like me who have similar concerns.
All right, so I'm sorry, I should have set this up. So what's happening here is the interview for RFK is starting, and she's basically just explaining to her why she thinks his anti-vax stance is going to be basically like a red line for her and people that vote like her. Now, again, she's basically just making this about herself. She's a journalist. You're supposed to be, reporting for the people. You're a leftist. You should know this, but this is why people's like grifter antennas go up when this chick starts speaking.
Concerns. So how do you win them over? What's your message to people who think like I do?
Well, but just tell me where you think I got it wrong.
Well, I think
that's not coming. Okay, here we go.
You get it wrong when you draw a correlation between the rise of things like autism and the introduction of vaccines when there isn't hard scientific evidence tying those things together.
A correlation.
So right there, she's already messed up.
Yeah,
once.
there is a correlation.
Doesn't mean
she
causation.
meant causation.
Yeah.
So she throws that out there, and he's ready to back it up. He's certainly ready. Let's watch.
Let's see
How
what
do you
happens.
know there's not a hard scientific evidence?
Well, because the one major study that purported to show that was retracted, and the scientist who conducted it was,
Now, what you're doing now,
basically
Crystal,
fraudulently created. Listen,
no.
Hold on.
You're
But
raising
I don't
this issue.
want to get in a debate with you about this because you've spent your life.
Because he would embarrass you because you don't know anything about what you're talking about, and that.
Exactly. So this is why I like Jimmy Dore. He calls it like he sees it. He's a progressive left-wing guy. Like, him and I couldn't be on more opposite sides when it comes to certain issues. But we're definitely in agreement here. He sees what I see, so I know I'm not crazy. And kind of what was so baffling about this is that this is, again, independent media. Hey, we're going to bring you the stuff that corporate media isn't. And this whole interview basically goes in a completely opposite direction because she's talking over him, she's interrupting him. The whole point was to bring him on there so he could talk about his own his platform and what he's there, what he's running for, what he's running against, and Breaking Points is basically supposed to be that middleman that basically, asks him questions that he's supposed to answer for the people. They're asking him questions for themselves or for herself, basically to cut him down before the interview can even get started by basically, branding him as some like crazy person because he has an anti-vax stance. And that's why I think Jimmy Dore early on in it was saying that she was basically promoting big pharma talking points, which is kind of what that is. But I see it for what it really is that she's just a corporate Democrat masquerading, grifting as some independent media journalist. I mean, it's no different than Jen Psaki being the press secretary, moving over to MSNBC, which I'm sure Crystal wishes she could be at again. And there you have Jen Psaki acting like a journalist. Like, it makes no sense. Like, you have bureaucrats that want to be journalists, and then journalists that want to be close to bureaucrats, but it's just a circle jerk of jerks. It's pretty crazy. And that RFK interview, I felt so validated by that because there was so much pushback. If you look in the comments, I mean, we could play that Jimmy Dore video even further, and you just see how he just rips her to shreds. Everything that she did in that interview just proved everything that I was saying. I mean, obviously nothing was proven about the fact that she is detached from everyday society and probably what it's like to, live paycheck to paycheck because she's obviously some rich girl. I believe she married a VC guy and she's worth $40 million now. Again, grifting for some reason, like she's just, an everyday woman just like me and you, when clearly she is not. Yeah, it just I don't get it. And this made me feel good because I was like, oh, okay, I know I'm not crazy. I see it too. And so did everyone else. This was kind of, everybody had something to say about this, from Dave Smith to Joe Rogan even, because Joe Rogan had him on his podcast. Actually, let's bring that up really quickly here. Okay, so Joe Rogan had RFK on his podcast. Right off the bat, I mean, I'm going to play this from right as the podcast is starting. I'm not even going to set it up. I'm just going to let it play, and I think you're all going to know exactly what the hell Joe Rogan is talking about as this starts. And remember, this is the person that gave them the stamp of approval. He's the one that basically, lifted them up when they when they broke away from the hill. All right, let's get to the video.
I like them because they keep people from locking in, but one of the things that I wanted to make sure I did in this conversation is not interrupt you. Because it's very frustrating for me when I'm hearing people talk in these what should be long-form conversations about very important and nuanced things. And, I think one of the things that happens is people are very concerned with letting you say things that is going to get them in trouble or get their channel in trouble. Like there's people that are doing a lot of self-censoring. And I think they're doing that also when they're having these conversations with you because they want to establish.
So I think we get the point that's going on here. Because, they were also talking about other people, not just breaking points. But I feel like that first, right out of the gate, hey, I don't want to be the guy that interrupts you. It's obvious who he was talking about there. And, you got Joe Rogan, for crying out loud, kind of just being like, yo, what's going on here? You know what I'm saying? Like, Joe Rogan, this guy is the guy that basically got you started. And his response when he goes onto this podcast is, look, I don't want to be the guy that interrupts you, this, that, the other. That's pretty telling. So, yeah, it's, and honestly, as far as Sagar goes, like, I don't really like picking on him, but, the guy just constantly seems like he's LARPing as a Republican. And then if it's specific to that interview, just watch him during the whole interview while this guy's RFK is being constantly interrupted by Crystal. She's not letting him speak. She's obviously trying to prevent him from at least, getting the conversation to the point where she could no longer, stay with him because she probably didn't do her research. What's Sagar doing the whole time? Just nodding away. Simp and nod, simp and nod, simp and nod, simp and nod. What are you doing, guy? Like, this is why I think a lot of people like this show, is because the whole idea was that they would push back against each other. I mean, she clearly pushes back at him every chance that she gets, but he not so much. And I don't like that. Like that seems to be like where the biggest turnoff for this show is that there's like all this pushback against what Sagar has to say, but like he refuses to push back against her. Not even know if he refuses to, but he doesn't. And I know he has the capabilities of it because he has done it at times. But there's sometimes that he just doesn't say anything. And, either there's a few things that are true here. Maybe he's a moderate Republican like we were talking about a few episodes ago. And maybe in these moderate positions that he has, maybe he actually agrees with her. But then I would say he's not really a Republican, thus the LARPing as a Republican. But that could kind of be explained basically by maybe him having more moderate positions than people should actually realize. Because, not all Republicans are hard right, fringe. Like, again, we talked about this a few episodes ago. There are, people on the moderate wing, centrist moderate wing. And maybe that's why he's there. But it still shouldn't prevent him from pushing back even for entertainment purposes. Like, you can push back just to push back because some people would like to hear what that rebuttal would be. And the fact that he doesn't do it, I think, really takes away from the quality of the show. And maybe I've had a harder time articulating that point in the past, but as I've gone back to watch it, and that's kind of been my biggest takeaway as I watch it, is just like she will push back at him. Sometimes he'll just sit there and nod or just let her get away with anything, and then he won't even push back for the sake of pushing back. Like, people watch this because they want to hear the other side of what is being said or what is being pushed back against. And the fact that they don't do this or that it's completely one-sided, I think feeds into my madness especially, but everyone else who is also frustrated with this show. So also, it's kind of crazy. I wasn't going to do a Breaking Points episode. I was going to kind of try to give it some time, but just given the RFK thing, and then another recent thing that has happened is they changed their studio. And I'm really left scratching my head over this one because, all right, let's do it this way. This is the old studio. Everyone remembers this. You got the brick walls, the books, the desk Sagar wouldn't shut up about. I mean, I think for like the first few episodes that this thing started on, it was just all about the desk. I love the desk. Again, nothing wrong with loving a desk. This desk I'm sitting at, it's all right. I didn't design it, but for a guy that really went on about this desk and talking about how much debt he went in over this desk, they certainly had no issues changing the set pretty quickly. Excuse me. And getting a new desk also. So that is the old set. Let's look at the new set. Now, this isn't a... Hold on. I'm going to hit play here. So here's the new set. Yikes.
Moment many people are saying. We've got two fantastic guests.
The graphics
Ryan
are different.
He's a political consultant
This
and
here.
author.
I don't really care what they're saying here. The graphics are different. Look, there's all these different lightings. Maybe it's me. But why? There we go. This is what I wanted. It feels like this is what this show feels like now. It's like part Around the Horn, PTI, and Meet the Press, but like the crappy versions of them. Not the cool version. Not what you see with the high production value. Like this looks like some college kid's idea of what they would do if they were like, all right, if someone was like, hey, I'm going to task you with designing a set. That needs to be like, part Around the Horn, PTI, and part Meet the Press. And it feels like this is what you would get. And I honestly don't even know what the hell I'm looking at. Because if this is supposed to be independent media, it's anything but. Like what is this? Like what am I looking at here? I mean, is this this is what kind of cracks me up. They spent so long shitting on CNN Plus. Didn't they even buy some NFT for CNN Plus because it had something? I don't remember. I listened to this show probably way too much. Yeah, and what? Literally, I can't tell the difference between you and CNN Plus, except you're on the air. Maybe that's the only difference. I mean, CNN Plus didn't last too much after that. But what the fuck is this? I mean, this is crazy. Now I don't know. I don't like it. I know I'm not the only ones that feel that way. I imagine the people that are, center left, David Pac-Man fans, Kyle Kalinske fans, Crystal's son. I'm sure they all like it. Those are probably where the positive comments are coming from. But, they were actually closing on 1 million followers. Oh, I guess they're getting close now. They were down to 971, and they're up to like 987. So maybe they end up breaking 1 million. But they had a huge setback from that RFK interview. And I don't know. It just, to me, breaking points, the more they seem to do, the more they seem to prove me right. It's just this weird, it brings good news. I'll say that, like they like Joe Rogan was saying, the idea is to have a long form discussion and not to interrupt people. Like, those are his two big things, and she broke that right off the bat in that RFK interview. And it doesn't work. Breaking points just doesn't seem to work like that. It is long form, but only when they talk about Ukraine. They only want to talk about that for 30 fucking straight minutes, and it's a lot of these things that they seem to focus on seem to be towards the center left side of things. And again, we said between, the moderate sides and the centrist, you're going to find a lot of intersections of policies and different things like that. But yeah, this show, like, again, it was marketed as she's a Democrat, he's a Republican. They have differences, but they're still kind of together. But if they disagree, there's pushback. This show is anything but that. And I just have a hard time with that. I just can't get over it. So anyway, moving on. All right, so I do a lot of talking on this podcast about culture, politics, and stuff like that, and I don't really do too much talking about me and some of my stories. Everyone's always like, Joe, you got great stories. You should share them more often. So that's kind of why I did the one about my friend who ran away here to Florida, which I still can't get over to this day, as sometimes I drive down that street, Seven Dwarves, thinking to myself, like, well, not only has this street changed in 8 years, but this is where my friend, when they passed this street, it was just kind of funny that I'm here now. So, some people have asked me to, talk about some other stories. And I mean, I don't really have anything too crazy, but I thought I'd talk about, so the second group of friends that I have. So I have two solid groups of friends. My first group of friends is the guys that I met when I was really young. There's one gentleman yet to be named that I met when I was in preschool. I think we were 4 to 5 years old. And I met this guy. He ended up living on the same block that my grandparents lived on. And I think I was over at my grandparents in the summer, and my dad took me out to play on the street. I was like 5 or 6. And as I'm out there, I see my friend who I'm going to nursery school with, and, he ends up living on the same block that my grandparents do. So whenever I go over to my grandparents' house, I'd go hang out with my friend Matt. I just walk down the street, go to his house, and we'd hang out. And then I remember a few years later, so now I think I'm in third grade, I think. And he's telling me, he's like, hey, I have these friends that live 2 blocks over that are moving right next door to your grandparents. I'm like, oh, that's the Carangello's house. He's like, yeah, that's their grandparents. He's like, you want to go over there and hang out? So anyway, this is how I met, Mub, Ken, is the older brother from that group of friends. And it actually, I almost feel like I should go into this now, but our grandparents used to be friends. Our parents were friends, and I actually will save this for another time. There's a lot of good stories there. But I want to talk about the second group of friends. We'll set that one up first. But yeah, trust me, there's Golf Cart Braganza, Negotiations 96. What else? There's so many crazy things that we would get into in the little suburb of Highland Park. Oh, here's a nice setup. We know the Highland Park shooter. His dad, we used to go to his white hen that he owned there in Highland Park. We get like really high and go there, and there was a situation we had, and I could tell that story too. But I want to focus on the second group of friends. So if we have time, maybe I'll tell one of those stories. But the second group of friends I met after high school. It's kind of interesting. I was with my girlfriend broke up with me about probably 6 months before this, and I guess this story goes, while we were dating, I was working at a Lou Malnati's in Highland Park, and there was a gentleman, one of the delivery drivers there, Matthew Carlson, I think is what his name was. He went to Deerfield, and I guess he had a sister that was a year younger than me, and I had another guy that worked there. We ended up meeting her at a party, okay? She was pretty cool. She was nice. So it was just one of those random names you would kind of hear as you're going through your years in high school. So anyway, I'm about about a year, just shy of a year of being out of high school. And there's this kid that I knew who was in band that nobody liked, and I just felt sorry for him. I kind of was been in that guy's position when I was younger. So I just felt like I wish there was a guy like me that would be nice to me because I had a hard time. It was the 90s. It was brutal out there, man. So I was hoping there, so I was trying to be the person that I wished that was there for me, for this guy. And I don't even remember how I was talking to him or why we were talking, but it casually came up that he had a friend that was, I don't want to get too in detail here, but he was looking for a friend that was looking for a specific pill that helps you focus, we'll say. And I had access to that. So he introduces me, and it ends up being Suzanne Carlson. And because of this, as I learned later on, I thought she was my friend. No, I was just some basically meth dealer to her. I mean, I wasn't dealing meth. I'm just saying, this certain product that she was seeking out had similar qualities. So we became friends just based on that. We would hang out. I was just a fucking simp idiot, so I didn't really understand what was happening. I just got dumped, so, there was that aspect to it. And I remember, so I'd hang out with her all the time. And then one day, they're like, oh, we're going to go hang out with this guy named JP. And this guy named JP wouldn't shut up about this guy named Dave Levin because I guess they just had stopped being friends. And then there's another night we were hanging out. I would just meet all these, random people. And Mundelein, it was right around Mundelein. There's something else, but whatever, is in that area. And we go over to this guy's house I don't even know why we were there. This is over 20 years ago. And I meet this guy named, maybe you might recognize this name. I meet this guy named Mark, who plays the guitar. You kind of find out the origins of how me and Mark met here. So anyway, I just meet him. Nothing much was said other than, yo, hey, what's up? He gets up, leaves, goes back in. I think he might have been selling her a specific product that she was looking for, similar to what I had access to. Maybe that's why you're there. Again, I don't remember. This is all just memories in my brain. So we go out there, meet him, and that was, I think maybe a few weeks later, we were looking for something to do. Hey, Mark, do you want to come out and hang out or something like that? Now, you have to remember, I was just out of high school. Mark was definitely younger than me, and I think he was still in high school, but he went to one of those high schools where they were like, we just got to get this kid graduated, So he would just sneak out of the house, I think. So this is I remember this is May, and so I think he was still in school. And so anyway, we picked him up, and then we go back to my house to run in to go grab something, probably something to smoke out of, knowing me and my friends. And as we're leaving, so my dad probably thinks that, so he sees me walk in with a girl. We go downstairs, we grab something, and he figures, oh, I'm going to do this kid a solid and ask him to play the guitar in front of this girl. Now, I commend the wingmanship, but kind of had the opposite effect. I mean, not on the girl, but, well, yeah, I'll just tell the story. So I play, I don't even remember, Rockin' in the Free World, I think. I didn't really know too much guitar back then, but a lot of those basic open chords I could play, so I think it was one of those songs. And, whatever, she's like, yeah, it was cool, and then we go back to the car, we sit down, and remember, Mark was there. I probably left that out. So maybe I just said, I don't remember. We picked up Mark, we go back to my house. So Mark's there. I get in the back seat. He goes, hey, he's like, I just heard your neighbors jamming. And I'm like, oh, really? Well, that's pretty cool. Because in my head, I'm thinking, well, I was just playing the guitar too. How'd that work out? And she's like, yeah, we're going back and forth. And then the girl, Suzanne Carlson, turns around and goes, you were just playing the guitar, Joe. He's probably talking about you. And I was like, oh, yeah, that was me. He's like, wait, you play the guitar? And I was like, yeah. You do too? He's like, oh, yeah. He's like, maybe you should go grab the guitar. And I was like, all right. So I go and grab the guitar, and I don't even remember we went somewhere, but the whole time I remember we're playing. Mark's just like, it's like lead guitar. I'm just blown away. I didn't want to play guitar around the guy. He was so good. But I got the nerves to be like, hey, you want to jam, start something up here? And he said, yeah, let's do that. And that was kind of where the beginnings of that. So I started hanging out with Mark more. And then here and there I'd hang out with Suzanne Carlson. But what was kind of interesting is through this process, so I'd say this has probably been about a month I've been hanging out with these people. Every so often I'd hear either Mark, or Suzanne, or mostly this JP guy, mostly him, talking about this guy named Dave Levin. Like, who the fuck is this Dave Levin guy? Everywhere I go, Dave Levine. Everyone's talking about Dave Levine. Who the fuck is this Dave Levine guy? Like, it got to the point where I'm like, well, I need to meet Dave Levine. All right? So, this is kind of where, like, I splintered off from Carlson and JP a little bit. Because I was probably focused more on playing guitar with Mark, is my guess, is what happened there. Because me and Mark started playing. I remember, like, we started playing. I go over to his house. So I think I'd probably pick him up from school sometimes. Because I wasn't doing shit back then. Yeah, I think that's how that. Yeah, and I remember there was one time we played, and then, like, these two girls would, like, come over. Because Mark was, I mean, you've seen the video. When he was 15, he was even prettier than he was when he was 35. So, like, he would get attention from girls, which I wasn't used to. Because the first group of friends that I had, the guys that did get attention from girls, they kept that away from the group because they didn't want me to be around. I understand now. Back then I didn't, but I get it now. Mark, he just met me, so he didn't. And I was a lot older too, so I kind of knew how to behave myself a little bit. I mean, I had a girlfriend for a few years, and in between all that, so, you know, I kind of understood what was going on. These girls are hanging out. Me and Mark go to the park. We're talking, and this is kind of where we bonded, and the band started moving forward from there. And then I think around this same time, this other friend of mine that I met on AOL started messaging me as well, and then we started hanging out. And then I'll never forget this. This is kind of where everything kind of came together. So a few weeks before so I'll say this. A few weeks before what I was about to talk about happened, Mark was telling me, he's like, I used to be in this band, and I have this bass amp, because he was trying to get back his stuff because we were starting to play more. So he's like, I have this other amp that we can use for when we play electric guitars. It's a bass amp, but it'll still work. It's like, all right. He's like, can you give me a ride over to this guy Dan's house so I can pick it up for him? I'm like, yeah, sure. So we went and picked it up. Okay. So a few weeks later, you know, we've been playing more, hanging out. This girl that I used to know, I actually got in trouble with my ex-girlfriend for hanging out with this girl, but it wasn't like that. I mean, it should have been, but it wasn't because I was an idiot. Now she starts calling me and hanging out and stuff like that. So I think it was like her, Mark's girlfriend, Kimmy, who just kind of came into the fray, and then me. And I think we were all hanging out we picked Mark, Kimmy up. We were all hanging out, and I remember it was like, let's figure out something to do. And then it came up, like, I think Mark was like, let's go hang out with this Dave Levine guy. And I was like, Dave Levine? This is the guy everyone's been talking about. This guy's like a fucking celebrity. I want to meet Dave Levine, for crying out loud. So let's go hang out with Dave Levine. Let's do that. So I'll never forget this. So Dave Levine ends up living, like, right around the corner from where my girlfriend lived. Well, not at the time. I think maybe it was the summer. Maybe she did live there still. I don't know. I can go into a whole nother tangent on that and probably what she was up to, but I will not. So it was kind of weird for me to be over there. That's kind of my point, because for the 2 years leading up to that, those were kind of my stomping grounds back that way. I mean, not on that side of the road that Dave lived, but in that general neighborhood. So it was just weird being back there, you know. So I'll never forget this. Mark had a cell phone. I didn't have a cell phone. So cell phones were still kind of new-ish. But I remember us going to Dave's, and he was like, you guys have to park down the street from the house. You know, like, this is just, I guess he didn't want it. Well, where he lived, like, if someone was parked in front of his house, it would be weird, you know, based on how the neighborhood was. And for whatever reason, I can't remember why, but that was the request that he made. So we're sitting there. I'll never forget this. We're sitting there. And I remember asking Mark, like, what is going on? What is taking so long here? Because from what I think I'd understood, Dave had, I think he had like a blunt kit or something that may or may not have had weed. So maybe that's what the anticipation was. Again, it was a long time ago. I don't really remember. But Mark goes, he's watching this movie 300. And Gladiator. I'm sorry. He's watching Gladiator. And when the movie's over, he's going to come out to the car. And I just remember thinking, like, who the fuck does this guy think he is? Making us, like, okay, this is a great first impression, motherfucker. I see how it is, bitch. So, anyway, now the other thing is, I'm kind of secretly freaking out because me and this other girl are vibing, the girl that I knew from before, not Mark's girlfriend. And in my previous experiences with, people from this town that I don't know, they, as I've gotten older, I realized they see me. I'm a weakling. Not like, I mean, I'm not weak, obviously, but as far as like the energy that I would give off, you're like, oh, I could basically just do what I want. This guy ain't gonna do shit. This is what I'm assuming, after all these years of how people treat me. And I thought with Levin coming into the fray here that when it came to this girl that I was somewhat pursuing, that he was gonna get in the way. So I remember he finally gets in the car. We meet. Everyone's talking. We're having a good time. I'm pretty sure a blunt was smoked at some point, I have to imagine. I remember us going back to Mark's house. So I remember this conversation, most likely because Mark was out of school, but he was also like 16 or 15. So he wasn't really supposed to be out late. It was probably 1 in the morning, most likely. So he's like, I have to get back to the house for whatever reason. I don't remember. So I remember us going back to his house, and we were sitting in his driveway. I think we were kind of waiting for him. And somehow it comes up about me and this girl. I don't remember if I said her name or not, and I don't want to say it, so I'm not. But this girl that was there that I was pursuing, it comes up about what's going on between us, so to speak. And I'm like, oh, this is going to get so fucked so quick. And Levin, out of nowhere, Dave Levin, I remember, I'll never forget this, because that was kind of the review of Dave, was like, he's not a dick. He's really genuine. He's a nice dude. Like, he's usually one of these guys that are like, that are the life of the party, but they don't have an ego about it, I guess would be a way to describe this person. And I'll never forget, like, as this conversation's going on, he chimes in. He's like, I've only met Joe, an hour or two ago, and just based on, like, how we've been talking, what we've been talking about, he seems like this guy's pumping me up to this girl that he doesn't know. So that was kind of like, okay, well, based on everything I've seen prior to this and this, like, I need to be this guy's best friend. So, and it kind of went from there. Like, I believe Dave and I started hanging out a lot more. It was same with Mark. But see, Mark kind of, as you could tell when he left Kimmy, went with Olivia, ran away here to Florida. He's kind of that friend that gets a girlfriend and then he just disappears for a few days, weeks, sometimes months. When he was younger, it was just days, and then it turned into weeks as he got older, and then months. And I think now it's in the years. But whatever. But that's kind of who he is, or is, whichever. And so I started hanging out with Dave more, and Dave was interesting because, he was dating Mark's cousin, Chantel. She was white. They're Italian, I guess. And they had a kid. There were some other things going on that came out in the 30 days or so after, I'd say over the summer. We'll just put it that way. And, Dave and I became close. So I think by the fall, we were working at a bowling alley together, and this was kind of where I was just like, so, okay, now I remember. So we had a few pretty Adderall-induced nights, the product such and such was searching for. And I was dealing with that breakup, and I think I would probably ramble on about it for hours on end, and Dave would literally just sit there and listen and give me, his advice and just being selfless. And it was kind of nice because I very rarely had run into someone who had this energy and aura about him that would treat you like that. Usually when you deal with guys like that, they have such an ego about them that they just weren't interested in anyone but themselves, especially in that fucking, rich town. So over those months, Mark and I were becoming, we were in a band together. Dave and I were becoming closer. And that was 2001, and that was kind of what it was for that. Mark and I split off a little bit. Our band, the band stopped about the fall. He just kind of aligned himself with Kimmy and started doing that. And I was just hanging out with Dave and Chantel all the time. That was kind of where I went. And then in between all this, I met a gentleman named Greg, who was also a part of this group. And then as time went by, I met this other gentleman. So now we're fast forwarding to about the spring of 2002. Yeah. And that's when I kind of meet the rest of the group. Now, the backstory to the group is, like, all these people met around in the late 90s, okay, when they were all in high school, because Dave's about a year younger than I was, grade-wise. I think, yeah, we're about 12 months apart. So so remember the story I said where me and Mark went to pick up that his bass amp or whatever at that gentleman's house. So that ended up being Dan. And Dan and I ended up hanging out in the spring because here's where this is going to get fun. we decide in the spring. So Dave, there's two Daves. Dave, we'll call it one Dilly, Dave Levin, and then there's Dan, the three D's and the J, and then me, and the Joey. And they say, hey, we're going to go out and it's basically you take a certain toilet boy cleaner that you're not supposed to use on like metal surfaces, and you put tinfoil in it, creates a pressure bomb, heats up the liquid, blows up, So we took a few of those, put it in a mailbox, and a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and you get what's happening. And, with me, I see something explode. I get very excited, especially when I was, mischievous. So we decide to go to Highland Park in Deerfield and do this. And, nothing was really said or nothing happened. We blew up a door here, a mailbox there. This is all public record in Illinois. Like, I'm not, this isn't anything that's not already out there. So the next day, they asked me, I get a call from them. They're like, hey, do you want to go do this again? And I'm like, no. I'm like, don't do it around here, please. Well, guess what? That's exactly what they did. So I'm at work a few days later, and the fucking Highland Park police, I don't even remember, one of their detective units come in, and they showed me this Polaroid, and it was a bunch of stuff that was thrown on the ground. They're like, do you recognize any of this? And I'm like, don't look familiar to me, sir. And they're like, do you know? And they basically started alluding to the mailbox thing. And I wish I could remember specifically what they were asking me. And I knew I shouldn't lie. But anyway, I got dragged down to the police station. And I had to fucking rat all these guys out. Well, so what happened is on that second night they were out, the police were already well aware of what had happened the night prior. So they were patrolling those neighborhoods. Lo and behold, they see a car driving around. This just shows you how fucking ridiculous the police are. It had no destination, as they put it. So that kind of, again, this is a sleepy fucking suburb. They have nothing going on except noise complaints and drunk Mexicans. So when something like this happens, this is going to stick out on their radar because, for instance, nobody meanders and drives through that area unless they're up to no good. At least that's how they look at it because, when you're out late, the cops think you're up to no good. And statistically, they're kind of correct, but they don't have the right to assume that, unfortunately, but they do. So that's what these guys are doing. So I guess the cops, they got freaked out. They told me, they're like, yeah, we figured we were being followed, so we pulled off somewhere and dumped all the shit that was in the car, which the cops figured that they would do. That's why they didn't bother to pull them over. They probably scared them to make them, and, as a way to kind of search the car without searching it. That was what the Polaroid they showed me was. So I wasn't lying to them. I wasn't there the second night. I didn't see any of that stuff. But I was there the first night, which they were kind of aware of because what I guess they found out is they're like, all right, well, let's search the license plate on that car that you saw. It comes back to Dave's old man. So they're like, all right, well, let's run that last name in the behavior disorder school, the BDS, whatever, the BDS school that's down the street from the police department. And sure enough, guess whose name pops up that has the same last name as that car, So they go talk to Dave at work, and basically he, confesses, and then that's how I got dragged into it. So then I confessed and so on and so forth. So my lawyer actually was Mike Quigley. I don't know if we can get that right here. Let's get a picture of that. Show Mike Quigley. That was my lawyer. He was basically how I met him was at the time he was a Cook County commissioner, and he had an office across the street from my stepdad's stepbrother's office because he was a lawyer also. I was asking him for help, and he's like, I'm not a criminal lawyer, bitch, but I know a guy that is, and that was Mike Quigley, who ended up becoming the Illinois state representative, I think, who famously introduced the Confetti bill that was about something about Trump or whatever. But yeah, that guy was my lawyer. He was the guy that got me out of this jam. And he didn't really get me out of much, but he definitely prevented the hammer from falling on me at least. And yeah, so I had to go through the Lake County court system, and long story short, I had to pay a lot of money, a year of probation. I think, it was like $3,000 in fines and Crime Stoppers, and the probation cost me money. A year of my life gone. I had to, report to an office twice a month. It was a fucking bitch. And what was interesting though is one of the stipulations to our, I don't know, whatever. It's been 20 fucking years. One of the stipulations to us being on probation was that we couldn't hang out with each other. And, when the government says, hey, don't do this, what do you think is going to happen? The opposite. We just did that. So we all ended up hanging out at Dan's house, which is so crazy. And yeah, we would just get fucking super drunk because we couldn't get high or anything like that. We would just get super drunk at Dan's house. And then that's kind of bringing this full circle to where I was before I started the side note here, is that this is when I found out that Dan's basement was where everyone used to hang out. You know, it's kind of like what Mub's house was to that first group of friends that I was in. We always hung out at Mub's house, which is great for me. It was right next door to my grandparents' house. So if I lived there at some points with my uncle when he was living there. And, you know, when I stayed there as a little kid, it was, you know, my friends were always there. They were always an earshot away. It was great. And with this group of friends, that was Dan's house, but nobody really lived around Dan. So it was kind of different in that aspect. But that's where everyone would hang out and get drunk. And you would ask yourself, well, how is this even possible? Well, Dan's mom was deaf. So we had many drunk nights where we were being loud and nobody was hearing us. That was in the house, at least. And yeah, and that's kind of what it was with those guys. I think I worked with Dan and Dave. We worked for a luggage company up there on the North Shore. I'm trying to remember in the mid-2000s how it went, because I turned 21 first. So I was the guy buying beer for the group until everyone else turned 21, and then we started going out more. But we had, you know, I remember like whenever we have tequila, we'd always get so drunk. You'd be like hanging out with one guy, like, this guy right here. You know, I just met him. He's a good guy. You know, like, that was kind of a running gag that we used to have all the time. And yeah, that was like my second group of friends. Greg was, that's what I was saying. So yeah, Greg, Mark, Dave, there's another guy called Al Barukovich, who used to provide various drugs. And I remember when Dave would tell me about this guy, I'm like, why couldn't I hang out with a guy like that had access to all these kind of things? I did know a guy like that, Pickle, who was on the podcast, episode 7, I believe. But he lives in Tucson, so that was not happening, you know? And yeah, it was just fascinating to see that, like, basically, as I started learning all this information about this group of friends that I had just joined, like, I was basically the last guy who kind of, you know, maybe I weaseled my way in. I wouldn't really call it that, but I mean, that door was closing, and I just fit right in as that motherfucker slammed shut. But you know, I was also, you know, I missed the good years. A lot of them would refer to the 99, 2000 as, you know, a time where, you know, everyone was just hanging out. It was more innocent, where now everyone's out of high school kind of doing their own thing. It was splintering off in different ways. But yeah, I mean, those guys, they're a great group of guys, of friends. I talked to them for a really long time. Unfortunately, Dan I haven't spoken to in God knows how long. Mark's disappeared. I think I mentioned that in the last, when we talked about Florida. Guy, that's the bass player that was in our band. He's same thing. Last time I talked to him was almost 10 years ago, when I was living in Chicago with Mark. Dilly, same thing. 8 years ago, he just told me to go fuck myself on Facebook. You know, like, yeah, sure, man, whatever. Try to not drink. Let's see who else is out there. Dilly, Dan, Chantel, and I don't speak anymore. I lived with her brother before I moved down here, and I wasn't saying too many positive things about her, which I'm sure got back to her because things ended pretty abruptly with her brother too. I was kind of a dick. I'm not going to lie. So yeah, so I had to talk to them. Sorry, the last few have gone a little long. I did not mean to put anyone through that, but don't worry. This thing will be clipped out. You will not have to watch all 46 minutes if you do not want to. But I do enjoy, this is why I kind of enjoy talking about my personal life. I could honestly, you know, with some of these stories, I could probably go on for another hour or two, but that's just not fun or feasible to do, you know, when you're flying this ship solo. All right. I think that's all I got for you guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Joe Persinger. This is the ever-evolving, never-ending Ready Said podcast. If society's a joke, then we're just here for the first set. All right, guys. See you next week.